Your appointment to FEMA should be finalized within the week. I've already discussed the matter with the senator.
I take it he was agreeable?
He didn't really have a choice.
Has he been infected?
Oh yes, most certainly.
This plague, the rioting is intensifying to the point where we may not be able to contain it.
Why contain it? Let the bodies pile up in the streets. In the end, they'll beg us to save them.
I have received reports of armed attacks on shipments. There's not enough vaccine to go around, and the underclasses are starting to get desperate.
Of course they're desperate. They can smell their death, and the sound they'll make rattling their cage will serve as a warning to the rest.
I hope you're not underestimating the problem. The others may not go as quietly as you think.
Some say it began in the spring of 1918, when soldiers at Fort Riley, Kansas burned tons of manure. A gale kicked up. A choking dust storm swept out over the land. A stinging, stinking yellow haze. The sun went dead black in Kansas. 2 days later, on March 11th, 1918, an Army private reported to the camp hospital before breakfast. He had a fever, sore throat, headache, nothing serious. 1 minute later, another soldier showed up. By noon, the hospital had over 100 cases. In a week, 500. That spring, 48 soldiers, all in the prime of life, died at Fort Riley. The cause of death was listed as pneumonia. The sickness then seemed to disappear, leaving as quickly as it had come.
1952 marks the end of the transition from John D. Rockefeller Jr. to his sons. It's from that point on that the brothers generation begins to have the recognition, visibility, and effective control over things that allows them to do the kinds of things they want.
The brothers were anxious to have the money, unlike their father, for whom the money had been associated with such evil, fraught with such peril. There was a kind of a sense that this money could be used for personal ends now to pursue their professional and social objectives.
This change to a higher phase of alert is a signal to governments, to ministries of health and other ministries, to the pharmaceutical industry and the business community that certain actions now should be undertaken with increased urgency.
I think as Americans, in order to stay alive, in order to preserve our way of life, people are willing to give up and to make sacrifices. Sure. But at the same time, there needs to be an orderly discussion of what the rights are of the American people when this happens.
Jeff, the primary thing that we say to anybody is let's cooperate and get this thing over with, and then we'll settle the differences once the crisis is over.
Such clergy response teams would walk a tightrope between the needs of the government versus the wishes of the public.
Unfortunately.
Plus a possibility of martial law, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Down the road, not going there.
That summer and fall, over 1.5 million Americans crossed the Atlantic for war. But some of those doughboys came from Kansas, and they brought something with them, a tiny, silent companion. Almost immediately, the Kansas sickness resurfaced in Europe. American soldiers got sick. English soldiers, French, German. As it spread, the microbe mutated, day by day, becoming more and more deadly. By the time the silent traveler came back to America, it had become a relentless killer.
Influenza viruses are notorious for their rapid mutation and unpredictable behavior.
For over a century, the booming science of medicine had gone from one triumph to another. Researchers had developed vaccines for many diseases: smallpox, anthrax, rabies, diphtheria, meningitis.
With the great advances in microbiology, we were eliminating mysteries, okay? The mystery of what causes this disease, the mystery of what causes this disease. The optimism of being able to visualize something, all we have to do is just look under the microscope and we'll see the organism and then take an action and see that something die off or be controlled. That leads to the thought of invincibility.
It seemed that the masters of medicine could control life and death.
John D. III continued to run the family philanthropies, but was emerging from his father's shadow through his work in population control and U.S.-Asia relations.
An investigative journalist from Washington, Wayne Madsen, says the outbreak of the virus is raising suspicion.
I spoke to two journalists, one from Mexico City and the other one from Jakarta, Indonesia. And of course, Indonesia had a problem not long ago with bird flu. Both these journalists have been in touch with UN and World Health Organization officials, including a scientist who's dealt with Ebola virus and HIV/AIDS in Africa. And it's their conclusion, these scientists who they've spoken to, that this is a very unusual form of flu because it looks like it is a product of some gene splicing. The flu contains elements of bird flu, two forms of human flu, and various forms of swine flu. To them, it doesn't look like this is naturally occurring. The other thing is the target for this flu, as opposed to other flus, it's not the very young and the very old, it's people between the ages of 20 and 45. And the other thing is people are not contracting this from pigs. The National Pork Council here in America says pigs are not being affected. This is human-to-human contact, so people who either eat pork or are exposed to pigs are not getting this flu. Very unusual, and of course the scientists are very alarmed by the way it's being spread and the speed at which it's being spread.
Here at Sandringham in Norfolk, the Duke of Edinburgh has managed a 20,000-acre royal estate for more than half a century. It's allowed him to pursue one of his great passions, conservation.
Well, there's a couple of French partridges these days. These are the sort of things we breed. They're incredibly stupid birds. They will run it, but in front of the car. Yeah. Go on, you silly animal. She got all sides of it, must have been.
I think probably, hopefully we left him or her behind.
That was her.
Yeah. We've got to stabilize the population. When I was born, there were
so what's wrong with the population? I mean,
with too many people. That's why we have global warming. We have global warming because too many people are using too much stuff. If there were less people, they'd be using less stuff.
The Duke sought allies of every sort to spread the environmental message. He even lobbied the Pope.
But you also had this idea that you brought conservationists and leaders of religions together. Was that
much later? Yeah.
Much later. And the idea behind that was?
It seemed to me that most religions attributed the world to some special creation. And I said, well, look, if you believe that God created the world, you ought to take an interest in its well-being.
The recent UN meeting in Cairo is appropriately focused on one of these key issues, population growth. But the controversies which have erupted at the conference illustrate the problem of coming to grips with issues that are deeply divisive and which have a profound moral dimension. The United Nations can and should play an essential role in helping the world find a satisfactory way of stabilizing world population and stimulating economic development in a manner that is sensitive to religious and moral considerations.
I was interested in reading that because at some points some religious teaching would sort of conflict with what some of the needs of conservation are. I'm thinking about, the arguments which lead to population explosion and all that.
Well, no, the consequences of population explosion is what matters.
How did they get around that?
Well, we didn't.
I just want to say that the only thing less popular than putting money into banks is putting money into the auto industry. So
18% are in favor, 76% against.
It's not a high number.
You're sitting here and you are laughing about some of these problems. Are people going to look at this and say, I mean, you're sitting there just making jokes about money with it? How do you deal with it? I mean, explain your mood and your laughter.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be...
Are you punch drunk?
No, there's got to be a little gallows humor to get you through the day.
We've had to endure much, you and I, but soon there will be order again. A new age. Aquinas spoke of the mythical city on the hill. Soon that city will be a reality, and we will be crowned its kings. Better than kings. Gods!